anything goes.
Right. You're on. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I think as Lori is getting ready, I'm going to embarrass you. I want you to come and stand here for a minute with me because you look so cute.
This lady really
and you too. Come on. We're gonna do the whole costume thing. Hello. You're too tall. This is Lori's daughter Zoe, so I can say things like that to her. She won't do it. A third costume. Here, let me get out of the way. All right.
There we go.
You guys line up with Lori. Do the whole costume thing.
I'm very composed.
Yes, I can see.
How far will my arms stretch?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, that's great.
John, not you. Everybody say, anything goes.
Anything goes.
Fabulous.
We're back in time.
All right, everybody got photos?
Great job.
All right, thank you so much, ladies. We'll do our song and dance. And
Do you want these? I just a little short. It's a good thing I'm wearing tops.
Are you going to pass those around?
I'm
All
going to
right.
start these. If you guys would just take one and pass them on down, there should be plenty.
Those are the lyrics for later, right?
And there's the set of correct lyrics on one side, the set of correct lyrics on one side, and the Russell and Holmes lyrics on the other.
Perfect. This all reminds me of a memorable evening with Diana Gabaldon when she came in to do what we call late night sex readings. and you were supposed to come.
And why haven't I
In
ever
your
been invited to
lingerie.
this?
In your life.
You weren't here. You were supposed to come in your lingerie. So Diana and I get down here and the room is packed and all. And guess we're the only two people wearing lingerie. Diana and me. And all of you were too chicken. So I really appreciate those of you who came in costume because really that makes a lot of fun, right? So thank you for the mask. Did everyone get their mask? Right. All right. So what's the way?
I have to take a picture from our point of view.
Oh. Is somebody going to post pictures of that group shot there?
Oh yes. Yeah. I was doing Facebook. You were doing Facebook. All right. Ellie will send Miles pictures that will be what, like an Instagram picture and a Facebook picture. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
for sure.
On the
We can do
Poison
that.
Pen.
Yes, the Poison Pen Facebook page.
Technology, my
Right.
Or go to the
You're holding things up.
I pushed the wrong buttons.
You took a
You
picture of
know,
your foot.
this wasn't a Mary Russell problem in 1925. Yes.
No, I'm going to override. It's okay.
All right.
Because women are stronger than machines any day. We can just turn them off.
However, you're not stronger than the microphone. So.
You all heard me, right?
Yes.
Right. Are you set now?
I'm set.
In that case,
Cheers.
Cheers.
Here.
a publication party toast to Mary Russell, Sherlock Holmes, and Laurie R. King, right?
You're here.
And you guys are very special because you got to come today and get a book that doesn't publish till Tuesday.
Yes.
So everybody who's not here has to wait till Tuesday because those are the rules. Right?
But in exchange, you have to promise that you're going to post on every social media site that you have out there. Every one of them with a picture.
Right, we're going to create indie. So Laurie and I have a history of traveling together. We've been in France together and rattled around the Dordogne and gone to the Prehistoric Man Museum. Laurie and my husband and I made an epic trip to Japan for, was it 3 books back or 2 books back?
Two books, two Russells back.
Right.
Two
And
Russells
so,
on lockdown, which nobody talks about.
let's not talk about lockdown
No.
today. We're not talking politics today
No.
either.
No.
All right. But anyway.
Except maybe fascism.
What's that? Anyway.
This thing that's long over with. It's a thing of the 20s.
No echoes of it presently.
I know.
And we are actually, in the fall, we are going to be traveling together in a family party from the Black Sea to Budapest to Vienna. And then I am splitting off to go to Vienna, and Laurie is going to Are you going to reveal it, or is it a mystery destination?
Well, I was thinking of going to visit Mrs. Hudson's stomping grounds in Monte Carlo. You think I should?
Oh,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which might be material for even 2 books, right? One is Budapest, or Bucharest, as it happens. And
Transylvania?
Yeah. I know, there was some talk of marrying a vampire, which might get occur.
But writers don't actually take holidays. We just do research.
Yeah, right. Yes, and in fact, we have our research in our little book about Japanese plumbing. For those of you who haven't yet read it, Laurie and I wrote a book together when we came back from Japan because the Toto toilet industry is like the reason to go to Japan. And when I came home, I installed a Toto with all the bells and whistles, including the self-raising seat and the heat and all that. And so when we have authors over to the house, Ian Rankin was the most bewildered by this. We go and visit my Toto. Anyway, we didn't
But
go.
the only thing it doesn't have is the chirping
music.
birds. I mean, some of them had chirping birds, so the person in the next stall couldn't tell that you were making a tinkling noise, because it was just sort of a tinkling sound of chirping.
There were times on our Japan trip when Laurie was given to unseemly laughter, and it would just like trickle out. Her finest moment, and then we'll move to Venice. Her finest moment was when we went to the Flaming Ramen Noodle Shop in Kyoto, which is just off the market. And part of their deal is they have these huge woks, you know, and they throw stuff in, and the flames come up, and the ramen comes up, and all. But they have this great, and so Laurie and I, of course, are visiting every single bathroom everywhere we go in order to discuss the Toto
And taking pictures.
and taking photos. So Laurie excuses herself from the table with her camera, disappears into the locked bathroom. It's very dark in this restaurant, and flashes of light come streaming out under the door, and the whole restaurant is going, what is she doing in the bathroom? It's just hilarious.
These are weird Americans. You don't know what they're doing.
But anyway, my point is, that which from I keep digressing, we did not actually go to Venice together, but we had been there separately. And Laurie's research trip took her, on our recommendation, to the hotel that Rob and I stayed in, which is called the Londra Palace, and it is right on the waterway. It's beautiful. It's right behind the statue, the equestrian statue, if you've looked at Venice and seen that. So the Giudecca is behind you, and the garden where the Arsenale and where Biennale and everything is down to one side, and San Marco and all that stuff is off to the other side.
And funnily enough, Russell and Holmes just happened to stay there as well.
No, at the Londra Palace.
Isn't that an amazing coincidence?
Yes. The reason I sent Laurie there, aside from the fact that it was almost this hot in Venice when Rob and I were there, it had air conditioning, which is a rare thing in Venice. Here's what they did that I just love. They had these amazing linen sheets, and they ironed them every day. I've never really appreciated the value of ironed linen sheets. So did Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes have that opportunity?
No, I think she just assumes that all sheets are linen and iron because she's lived with Mrs. Hudson.
How did I not realize that? Sorry. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Venice, which is a really magical place, and it has a very long history. Any of you read Donna Leon?
Yes.
All right. So some of you already know the history, but it started out as a place of refuge in a whole kind of marshy delta, and gradually pilings went down and it grew. But it probably hasn't changed geographically from Mary Russell's visit to today, has it? I think it took its present form a while back.
And in fact, it was very interesting because one of the things that I was researching was the effects of the First World War on Venice, because I was, it ended just 7 years before this book starts. So I was looking to see if there were great holes in Venice as there were in London in the 20s. And there's maps you can find of the actual locations of where bombs hit by the German pilots dropped, or
You're talking about World War II,
World War One.
Really? They
Yeah.
bombed Venice?
They bombed Venice in World War
Wow.
One, and there's these maps, and it is absolutely fascinating the number of bombs that just happened to land in the Grand Canal rather than on a building. At first I thought I was reading the map incorrectly because here's the island and here's the canal, and there's this concentration of little black dots that run right around the edges and through the canal and then off, and you think, surely I can't be understanding, but yes, indeed, the pilots sort of looked at it and thought, well, surely the canal is as good as one of the palazzos, right?
There was some effort to be, the Allies in World War II, while they did decimate some things, made a real effort. This in Milan, not to bomb the Duomo. Of course, the mayor of Milan was partially responsible because he lit it all up and said, more or less, please spare me, which was wonderful. But I didn't realize there was a lot of aerial bombing in World War I, but I guess they should.
Yeah, they were.
Planes
I
were
don't
so
know.
fragile you couldn't really take up a bomb and.
Yeah, no, the bombing there involved this.
Right.
Dropping.
Right. But no, I was thinking about the weight. You didn't support a lot of weight.
No, but
There we go. All right. So if you traveled in the Eastern Mediterranean in particular, you will know that Venice was actually a voracious and very autocratic sea power. And if you go to places like Rhodes and so forth, the walls and a lot of the rooms there are Venetian. And when trade was not Atlantic, so before Columbus went west, trade from Europe to Asia went to Constantinople and around. So Venice was the gateway to Europe for trade from the east that came through the Silk Road and debouched basically in Constantinople. And there was a long history between them. Once the Atlantic opened up, and England and Portugal and then Spain and all, Venice began to decline as a commercial and a sea power because there just wasn't enough money there anymore. So they had this huge thing called the Arsenale, which was their giant naval shipyards, which is really fascinating. Today it's where they host Biennale, which is the art festival.
Yeah.
So Venice today is really, kind of like a Disney city. It's a tourist city, although people actually live there. And it's nothing like the kind of power that it was. The Doge was a real autocrat, and they had, I think the word sinister comes from all this, doesn't it? They had the lion's mouth where you would inform on people if you wanted to turn somebody in. There was, I'm pretty sure it's a lion statue with an open mouth, and you could denounce people by writing something and dropping it into the mouth of the lion and so forth. And they had a kangaroo court. Well, they didn't know about kangaroos, but so, the principle. So, if you go to Venice today, it looks, so charming on the whole bit, but you really need to know about its very dark and a difficult past.
And in fact, most of the major artworks that are in there, not most of them, but an awful lot of the iconic Venetian pieces of art are looted.
Yeah.
And in fact, the very essence of the main piazza there is San Marco. And the reason that it's San Marco is that St. Mark's bones are there because somebody stole them from a church that had them, hid them in the ship's hold under a bunch of pork in case the Muslims would find them. So they didn't go looking for them. And then they popped up in Venice and they said, it's a miracle!
It was an actual raid. The Venetians went to Egypt. They knew where St. Mark was buried, and it was an actual purposeful raid. They sent, a party to Egypt to heist them, and they did indeed.
Because St. Mark really wanted his bones there. So all this was doing was making it as it should have been.
And if you think this is weird, while we were in Wyoming, staying with C.J. Bobs, there's a parallel here. I'm not reaching. Honest to God, I'm really not reaching. So we went to visit, there's a whole, in Cody, Wyoming, it's a whole thing about Wild Bill, or not Wild Bill,
Buffalo Bill.
Right, Buffalo Bill. Thank you, I'm having a moment. Too much Prosecco. Anyway, and so everything about Cody, Wyoming, and the whole history of Buffalo Bill would suggest to you that he is buried in Cody, Wyoming, right? What happened is, according to CJ, who's got it in a book or something of the sort, or going to put it in a book, Buffalo Bill went to visit his sister in Colorado, and he died. And the Coloradans took the body and buried it. The Wyomings sent a raiding party to Colorado because they wanted to bring it back, and the Colorado's answer was to dump like 18 tons of concrete on top of the tomb. So the Wyoming people couldn't get it and take it back to Cody, Wyoming. Now, it's the same story, you know. It's just, I know you thought I was really reaching, but no, it wasn't. And part of the reason, of course, aside from sentimentality and all, is that it's a, you know, it's a economic and tourist icon to have him buried in Wyoming, Cody, right? And that was the reason the Venetians, I don't think it was really religious fervor, I think it was basic economics.
Oh yeah, they were a trade center and they deserved it, so they had it. I mean, and all these things, you know, the top of the two columns. How many of you have been to Venice? You know, outside between the San Marco Piazza and the waterfront are these two columns, which were stolen. There were three of them, except one of them fell overboard, so it's somewhere down there in the basin. But
along with the bombs.
They're keeping each other. They're probably not dig it out because all the bombs will explode. So, but they mounted them up there, and then they put these statues on the top. Except the statues are only pieces of other statues that they put together to make San Teodoro with his sea monster, who's a crocodile. And the lion, which was probably originally a griffin, but they took the wings off and they put another, and they stuck the tail on. So, I mean, it's this weird hodgepodge of things that is now iconically Venice. And you think, oh, really?
So here's the other part. There are a lot of islands. There are canals, lagoons, and a lot of islands. And some of them are famous for different things. Torcello is where the beautiful Byzantine, the Black Madonna mosaics are. Burano is the center of the embroidery industry. It's a really wonderful island to visit. Murano, you probably all know, is the glass blowing center. And Lori, there is another island that features in your book.
Well, yeah, there's a number of them. And you know, you have to realize that Venice was a swamp. And originally, it was a refuge for people from the whole area around the northern Adriatic who were fleeing from some kind of war or other. So they would go in these places that had these little perches of land, and they gradually spread out. Venice is built on wood that's driven down into the mud, and stones put on top of them, which, you know, as a Californian, to have a wood foundation and a stone building is really quite bizarre. But bit by bit, certain islands took over certain functions, and Murano became the glass island because they didn't want the kilns of the glass blowers to be threatening where the other people lived. So they put it off in the distance. It's a lovely island now, but it must have burned a lot in the beginning. But one of the places that I was interested in, and because I knew I was writing a book set in madhouses, as one does in 2017, not to get into politics.
I keep trying to suppress her, but it's going to be hard.
As somebody who's really apolitical, I find myself, nothing. There's a madhouse island. It's not called the United States. It's called San Servolo. And San Servolo has this really brilliant museum that is where the insane asylum used to be. For those of you who have read the Child Herald things and all there's one section where they're going past San Servolo at night, and they hear the bells, and the bells are clanging, and it's referencing the madhouse. And so I thought I really must write about a madhouse set in Venice. So I made a date to go, and I found a guide, and she was going to take me around. And I then started doing further research and discovered that Venice had not one, not two, but 3 madhouse islands. So I thought, this is my kind of place. The San Servolo one was for men. San Clemente, which is just off of the Giudecca Island, it's just the next one up, and it's now Hilton Resort, so one of the big resort hotels is built this place there.
Probably not the Cipriani, which is having a big anniversary this year.
One of those.
Right.
Yeah, one of those. It has a separate shuttle. I mean, but it
I've
used to
been
be the,
Cipriani.
and it's the one where, again, not to mention politics, but Mussolini locked his first wife up because she insisted that she was actually his wife. So he put her in there and just left her there, along with her, her son was in another. Let's not get into that.
All right.
Anyway,
Can I interject
but
a
that
comment
was
just to show off. Do
okay.
you know that's what George the First did to his wife?
No.
Sorry, this is my history day. George the First, the first Hanoverian king, didn't like his wife, and so when he was invited to be king of England, he conveniently locked her up. Her name was Dorothea, in a madhouse. Got rid of her, and that was actually no joke. Madhouses and convents both were places where disposable women were immured, and they really didn't have any great way to leave.
Which is a nice segue into the first section of the book. Thank you. Which has to do with actual Bedlam. I mean, Bedlam is, and again, a fascinating museum on the other side of London now. Have any of you been to the the War Museum? Yeah. The War Museum building was Bethlehem Royal Mental Hospital until 1930. So that's the one that, in the course of this, Russell wanders into. And she meets people in Bedlam, that being the main sort of upper middle class asylum. I mean, the upper class people would have put people in, would lock them up in a more private way. They would have just sort of put them on a house in the estate or something. The lower class people were in county asylums. But if you were an educated person, if you were a governess who went nuts because of kids.
Not politics, but definitely.
You would end up in Bedlam. So it was this really interesting, and that Richard Dadd was there, and a lot of artists, and sort of the edge of aristocracy. There's a person in this book that spends some time there, who was probably slightly too high a class for Bedlam, but it was a fairly flexible entrance requirement, shall we say.
So if you think of Jane Eyre, for example, where her wife was locked in the attic, it took a staff. Not only did you have to have an attic, a remote attic, but you also had to have people, who would look after her. So you're right. Sometimes it was just they were kept at home, but sometimes those were the genuinely dangerous and mad, whereas the people you just wanted to get rid of or steal their estates or whatever it was that was going on might well go to one of the hospitals, and you could usually find some convenient medical, a doctor or something, who would help out in the whole deal.
I mean, it's really fascinating to look at what happened to mental health care and hospitals during the 19th century, because when you think of Bedlam, you think of the woodcuts and the images of the rich people wandering through and staring at these naked, insane people and looking at their antics. They would pay an entrance fee, they would go, and that would be their Sunday afternoon outing, was to look at the loonies. But by the 19th century, there were certain reforms that came in, and they began to actually treat the illness in ways that were perhaps effective. They gave them food, warmth, shelter, conversation. They gave them a regular schedule. They gave them the kind of work that they could do and were interested in, whether it was outdoors or indoors. And amazingly enough, they found people got better. So it wasn't until the chemical treatment came in the 20s and 30s, and you started getting electroshock therapy and tranquilizers and the rest of it, that we changed dealing with it from what they called talking therapy to what then ended up with the cuckoo's nest approach to mental illness. And you can't help thinking that maybe an awful lot of the people who were talking to themselves on the street, not the people who were talking to their cell phones, but the people who were talking to themselves on the street, wouldn't be better off in a place like Bedlam, where they were just, demands were not made on them other than not to go out and frighten the horses.
Well, we don't need to go again into a whole debate about mental health care, but just turning people loose has not been very effective. And certainly the terrible events of this week have shown that, depression and so forth leading to suicide is not being adequately treated. So I don't know that we can pat ourselves on the back and say we're a lot more civilized in how we're caring for people with mental illness than the people in the 19th century. And as you say, a lot of it was just giving them decent living conditions, companionship, and a schedule on some level, sort of like puppies.
Yeah.
A level of, I know our owner's so bad we had to send them to doggy boot camp and they're going back in July. But you need to have a stern hand sometimes with puppies, and also I think with other people who are not perhaps on the same wavelength.
We're not
as you
doing
are.
politics here.
No, we're talking puppies. Right. But anyway, so what happens is, if you recall the last book, Mrs. Hudson is a pivotal figure, and at the end, well, she goes off to pursue, or she's going to go off and pursue a life of her own, right?
Freedom for Mrs. Hudson.
Yes.
And so Mary Russell has to cope with the fact that the woman who made her life run so well isn't there anymore. And then what? So that's part of the jumping off point for this book.
And I think we all know that Mary Russell is not much of a cook.
Yeah.
So the book opens with a charred corpse. and goes downhill from there. They end, fortunately, there are pubs in the neighborhood. So, but yeah, I mean, it's fascinating how you start writing a book with one thing in mind. And my thing was, I had originally thought that I would be writing a book set in the Tower of London.
As one would.
And after the events of November 2016, not to get into politics, I thought I can't see living in the Tower of London for a year, because a book takes a year. And I just couldn't see a place with that grim a history. That 2017 was going to be a really good year to spend there. So I looked
for you.
Yeah.
Let's make it clear. You're talking about you spending
Yeah.
in your head at least time in the Tower of London.
Yeah,
Not
I mean,
necessarily Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes, who probably would have been okay with it.
and in 1925, it probably would have been quite nice. But I thought, if I can't write a book set in the Tower of London, because every day I would sit down to write something about drawing and quartering and hanging and bloodshed and prison, all these things that I just didn't want to focus on, what else can I write about? And what can I write about that has a certain amount of humor, dark humor preferably, but humor? And I thought, one of the sort of things that I had thought about at some point was to write a book set in Venice. And I thought, I can go to Venice. Venice works for me. And after telling my editor, you really don't want a Tower of London book this year. You really don't. We agreed that we'd go to Venice. And so I ended up having to literally go to Venice. How I suffer for you people. See from the images on the screen, I really sweat for you.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, and it was so interesting because here I am, 1925. It's not a Biennale year, so I couldn't get into the whole art world, which would have been a whole. Now at first I thought, as Biennale, I could bring Damien down and have him involved, and But no, so it wasn't a Biennale year. It was an every other year.
When did the Biennale? That's a really interesting question. Did they have Biennale in 1925?
Oh yeah, it started in 1895.
No, I'm talking when Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes were there.
It started in 1895.
1895. You said 1995.
No, I said 1895.
Okay, 1895.
No.
Do you all know what Biennale is?
Yeah.
It's a gigantic art. It's one of the world's great art fairs, And recently, or at least when I was there last time, it had been taken over by video artists. So there was a lot less in terms of, you know, the kind of traditional art, and there were a number of what I would call very strange artwork, you know, the sort of thing you'd see at MoMA on a peculiar day.
It's actually what they've done is they have Biennale, which is the art
Right.
installation, and then on the other years,
Right.
they have the film and architecture biennales. So they have a biennale every year. It's just not the same biennale, but it's fascinating because everywhere you go in the city, there's things that show up. There's these giant hands that's on the screen at the moment that you know they were boating them down the Grand Canal and propping up a building with these huge 40-foot tall hands. There's exhibitions and shows and all the rest of it.
And particularly given the fact that these were the shipyards, these are enormous buildings, you know, huge, like airplane hangars and so forth. So you can, in fact, do some very odd, very enormous art installations inside them without any trouble at all.
But because it wasn't a Biennale year, I had to think, okay, what else is going on in 1925 for Russell and Holmes to get into? Because that tends to be how I start a book. Is I choose a place and I look to see who was there and what they were doing and what were the main issues. Well, 1925 was the year that Mussolini declared himself dictator. So here I am. I thought I got away from politics. God, here I am back again. So you'll see a few black shirts in there. They don't rule the thing entirely, but there are black shirts. But it's also a year where Cole Porter is there. And because it's a summer, this is a rare Russell book where she's not cold. She doesn't have chilblains this time, which is really a whole new Russell. And so she gets involved with the Lido. They have these parties and cabarets and all the rest of it, and so she has fun. And meanwhile, the black shirts are lurking around the background. And here's Cole Porter, and he as I tend to do with these books, I introduce a real life character and get him involved with Sherlock Holmes, because why not?
Absolutely, why not? So tell us a little bit about Cole Porter. Why was he in Venice, and where was he in his career? Anything goes, you will see. The sing-along song here relates to Cole Porter.
Yeah. Well, in 1925, Porter was he had just finished a show that flopped in the U.S. I swear, politics is not part of this book. His thing was about the American immigration policy. I kid you not. He was involved in the music and book for this ballet, and it for some reason didn't make it big on Broadway. And so he and his wife had more money than they could possibly spend in a lifetime. And so why worry about it? Why? So they would go to Venice, rent a palazzo for, 40,000 American dollars a month, which was millions. And they would do. One year he had a barge that he made a dance floor and sent it out into the laguna, and they had a Negro band, the jazz band. And the only drawback of it was he forgot about the fact that women need a toilet.
Oh.
So it was about a 3-hour dance band, and then they came back. The men were fine, but the women said, this is fine for me. I need to. So, but he would go, and one year he hired something like 80 or 100 gondoliers. They were just all his for the summer. So there was this whole influx of extremely wealthy Europeans and Americans who would come over and basically take over Venice for. Why the summer? I don't know, because it seems to me it's really not the time to be in Venice.
No.
I think probably the seaward side of the Lido is a little better because there's a constant breeze. But the lagoon itself is really awfully warm and kind of smelly. But
And lots of mosquitoes,
But I suppose,
unsurprisingly.
but I suppose if you drink enough, you know.
People didn't have this is before air conditioning. I don't think that people had an expectation necessarily of being cool or at a stable temperature. So that probably had something to do with it.
Yeah.
Basically, you're talking about cafe society,
Mhm.
which is really more of a middle class phenomenon, isn't it, than an upper class?
Well, these were middle class people with a lot of money.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, it's people like
Yeah.
Barbara Hutton.
Although there were a lot of English
Well, I
aristocrats,
wasn't going to go that far, but
you know,
still.
and MPs who would come
Yeah.
over. I mean, Churchill was a regular on the Lido scene.
Right.
A lot of the people who later became big names in the 30s and 40s were regulars in the 20s. Duff Cooper and his wife Diana were there all the time. And so this is this whole community that Russell and Holmes get involved with. So Holmes goes off and talks to Cole Porter while Russell goes off and becomes a flapper, basically. So.
It's an expat thing, kind of like, you know, Casablanca was in the 1950s when Doris Duke and Barbara Hutton and so forth had a whole, or the French Riviera. And today, I think the little island of Hvar off Croatia is suffering dreadfully from that because they're avoiding Greece, and they were avoiding Greece. And so, you know, there's been a kind of a congregation of a lot of people with money looking for a good time.
Yeah. The Lido is actually quite interesting. The Lido is the long, thin island that keeps the lagoon from the Adriatic. You know, when you look at a map, there's this kind of watery area, and then Venice is plopped in the middle of it, and all these little islands that march their way along. And the piece of land that connects the shoreline is the Lido. It's this long, thin island with 2 or 3 holes in it that the big ships can come through. And during the late 19th century, it became a sort of health spa area for people out, especially with skin problems, because you could take the sun, you know, all winter time. So they had a lot of hospices and health hospitals, skin care hospitals that sprang up along the Lido. And from that came this sort of vacation spot atmosphere. And then the Excelsior Hotel opened up towards the end of the 19th century, and just everything boomed.
All good. So, Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes go to Venice. Why? I know there's a plot to this book.
There is
Honestly,
a plot.
There is a plot.
There is a plot. Yeah, and the book starts with, as all good books must, a phone call. And Russell is brought into the search for her college friend, Veronica. Remember Veronica?
Yes.
Okay, Veronica calls to say, my aunt has disappeared. I need you to find her. And Russell says, I don't think so. But of course ends up doing so. And it turns out that the aunt is mad, or at least she has been condemned to various asylums, which may or may not be the same thing. And she has disappeared from an outing from Bedlam. And without going into details of why, eventually Russell thinks that perhaps she may have ended up in Venice. It makes sense in the book, although when you say it, it's a long, but so they go off to Venice, and one of the pleasures of writing a book in which Russell and Holmes are together the whole time, which doesn't always happen, as I'm sure those of you who have read them know, and complain about a lot, that they sometimes aren't together sniping at each other and insults and the rest of it. In this case, they actually are. They're together the whole book. And it was a lot of fun because Holmes really doesn't like Venice. He really doesn't want to go there. This is not his kind of place at all. I mean, he's much more the sort of Germanic, structured, trains running on time kind of a guy. Venice is not that kind of a place. So he really is not looking forward to it. And there's sort of references to something from his past that took place there that you think maybe you're going to find out about, but I'll tell you right now, you don't.
Oh, come on, spoiler. Oh.
Because I have to write a second Venice book, right?
Yes.
Well, that's probably all we can actually tell you about the plot. But it's a very interesting story, and a provocative story, I think, will make you think. you had a lot of fun with it despite the various political elements.
It is just fascinating how you head off in one direction and you keep looping back into the area that you thought you left. So yeah.
Yeah, well, the 1920s were a time of retreat for those who, I wasn't quite alive then, I lived through McCarthy, but the 1920s was a whole period of retreat in America with Senator La Follette in Wisconsin. It's Wisconsin again, it was Wisconsin with McCarthy. And I'm trying to remember what it was called. There was a name for it. But anyway, it was a whole isolationist thing. And that is what drove FDR to take some of the measures he did to break loose from that and involve us in defending Europe and so forth in the Second World War. So it's not this, it ebbs and flows. Isolationism and multinationalism really ebb and flow. It's just the way it is, right? It's just not much fun to live through those periods.
No.
Right, but as I've often said, I'm addicted to Regency stories. I love them, and that was a 20-year war, and nobody knew how it would come out until Waterloo. So it wouldn't have been that much fun to actually be in a Jane Austen era if, it's fine now because we know how it worked out. So maybe in 5 years we'll revisit all this, and we'll know maybe how some things came out.
And 5 years from now, undoubtedly would have been a different book.
Yes, but you can
5 years ago.
That's the good part. Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes, who apparently is ageless and will live to be like 125, but everyone knows that they can revisit various sites. Part of the fun I think you have of writing the books is because you keep taking them to new locations. It's never the same book.
This is
They're
always
just
the
not
problem.
in Sussex all the time.
Yeah. I mean, this is always the problem with the series. And this series is getting on for, what is it? Is it 15? This is 15 novels, and then there's a bunch of stories as well. If you are writing the same place all the time, it's kind of hard not to be repeating yourself to some extent. And so I started early on in sending them off to different parts of the world. I go to Palestine and
Japan,
and then they end up in Japan and this exotic,
even California,
this exotic city on the coast of California. Yeah,
right.
And I think that helps as a writer. It helps me because it not only opens a new setting geographically and socially, but it also means that I have a handful of really interesting people that I can pick and choose from. So that if I'm writing a book set in 1924 California, Dashiell Hammett is there. When I'm writing a book about Morocco, I get to meet Marshal Leoté, who is a fascinating guy. And
T.E. Lawrence in Israel. Lori and I had many discussions about T.E. Lawrence. Yeah, but no, it's fun because you do get to bring in historical persons in these very different places.
Yeah.
So at this point, do you think that we should have a little dance demonstration?
Is it time for Charleston?
Yes.
I think it's always time for Charleston.
I think
it's always time for Charleston.
Now, what are we doing? Do you have music on your phone? Is that what we're
actually,
doing?
on my little computer, yeah.
On your little computer. Okay.
Nice.
Right.
So
So if you don't mind the 21st century intruding for just a moment, we will plug in computers.
And then we'll have a little sing-along, and then we will have questions from the audience. So we will go in that order. Right.
Do we need to move this table back?
We might. Right. We're going to create a little class right here. Hold that. Perfect.
Are we scratching your new floor?
We probably are, but that's all right. It's going to take a pounding, so, it is whatever it is. Great. So, meantime, you guys can practice your lyrics. Or should we do the song before the dance while we're getting the music? How are we doing over there?
I think we're good.
We're doing great. Okay. This is so much fun. Were any of you here for the fashion show for the book? Was it 2 books ago? For the entire
Dreaming Spies.
If we put this, we put it over here, put this. Let's see, where is the speaker?
That makes sense.
Where's the speakers on these things? You know where the speakers are?
I can hear the music.
Do you know where the speaker is?
Here's the funny check.
Wait a minute, we may be able to fix it. Hold on. One moment while we have a technical moment here.
While he's working on that, we can begin the technical portion of our show where you're actually learning how to do the Charleston. Because you don't think you're gonna sit down when they're Charleston. Don't you agree that they should in fact learn a little standing up? If they would be
Absolutely.
So, I'll show you a little bit, and then if you feel like you would be like brave like Mary Russell and move, you can try it. So,
I can see a few.
right. It might be easier if you don't stand up quite until I show you the feet. So you have to get the in, out, in, out, in, out. Okay, so once this is going like this,
Anyone
then
with knee problems, stay
Right.
seated.
and then you're about, but you can do this part with your hands. Okay, so if you're doing this, then you're stepping, and so slowed way down here. So both feet out, up, down. It has to look completely ungainly.
It's like ducks.
And that's literally, I'm absolutely serious. So that once you get it going, then of course, if you're a young thing, as they,
Dad is better at this for sure.
so then you can go around. So slowly, you guys can try it. And if you can't get your legs, you can always do
slow part.
your arms. So we'll do the slow part.
All right,
So we'll
so
go 1 and 2. There you go. And then another fun part to do is the step, kick, step, down. Y'all can do that too.
Easier on your knees by a lot.
So,
you can modify this.
so what I do? Yes. Another fun part that we all have seen. Get out.
The Josephine Baker style.
And then another really fun step. I'm not as young as I was. You go step, 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 bump, bump, and step, step, step. Bump, bump, and step, step. And my favorite thing to do when I'm really so you guys can do that. You get the finger going. And a little bit of this.
I love it. Do you know what you could do? You could actually dance right up the aisle, like that, in that little step. Right?
My dear new friend, that,
Well, I can do some of that.
yes, you can look elegant behind me.
You shake your fingers to go up the aisle.
You
That's
cannot
right.
be
Just like
elegant
that.
and do this.
Okay, I think we ought to have all 4 of the costumes and
Come.
shaking your finger.
Oh, I
shaking
shake
the finger. That's it.
Shake
All right,
the
all
finger.
right.
Shake
All
the
right.
finger.
You go up the aisle and shake your finger all the way, and then you can bring a glass of Prosecco back.
All right.
Right.
So,
There's,
when the music is, when
all
how
right.
that's
There's Prosecco at the end for these. All right. It all works out.
so start your feet going. We can't do it if you're not doing it too. A little bit. There you go. See, we got a little bit.
No tripping anybody in the aisle, too. Yeah, let's be fair.
Fingers.
So when we clear off the floor for the signing line, those of you who are bored standing in line, you can Charleston up and down the line while we do that, which would be really fun. All right, now the sing-along. All right, has everybody got lyrics? I don't have lyrics, but
Hold on.
I think I can at
Do we
least
have
remember.
anyone who can actually sing?
Kind of.
We had music, but it's hard to hear, so let's not.
Can I play that for a minute? All right. Okay, let's see if I can do it.
Yeah, can you guys share?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. All right, I have to take a low key here because I'm not a soprano anymore, for sure. All right.
Doing the Russell and Holmes first.
Right?
Yes.
No, I was doing the, the Russell and
We're
Holmes
doing the
version.
Russell and Holmes version.
All right.
On Tuesday, we will launch, to go with the other launch, we will launch on YouTube the book trailer that has Anything Goes and scenes from people whom you might recognize doing various things. And along with the theme of Anything Goes. So, but we are using the actual words, the actual Cole Porter words from that one, because for some reason the Cole Porter estate wasn't too keen on us changing words. However, for this purpose here, we can use the other version, which is the Russell and Holmes version. Okay? So you all need to turn to the side that has not Cole Porter, but the book cover on it.
All right.
No, I've not, because I
All right.
have the other version.
In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking, but now Holmes knows anything goes. Good authors too, who once knew better words, now only use Holmes Russell words, writing prose. Anything goes. Sherlock is mad today, Russell is bad today, facts are wrong today, and short is long today, and here is there today, no matter where today, my idol of a man goes. And though he's not a great romancer, Holmes knows that his gal will answer at the propose. Anything goes. When Mrs. Hudson nearing 80 in nightclubs is getting matey with gigolos. Anything goes. If Russell's car you like, if Bill's bars you like, if Mary's club you like, if Tilly's pub you like, if Michael's lad you like, he's not so fat you like, you'll love amigos, Romeos. When blue bloods take to the asylum because life can't